What if you were told you weren't good enough for a job, not because of your skills, but because of the color of your skin? This is exactly what happened to her. She was overqualified, determined, and ready to prove herself. But none of that mattered to them. In that moment, they didn't just reject her for the job, they rejected everything she stood for. But little did they know that rejection would spark a chain of events that would change everything. Her name was Amara Williams, a woman who had worked tirelessly her entire life to get to this moment. Born and raised in a small town where opportunities were scarce for people who looked like her, Amara knew the value of hard work. From a young age, she dreamed of breaking free from the limitations her environment placed on her. Amara was smart, driven, and fully qualified for the position she was applying for. She had a degree from a prestigious university, a track record of excellent work, and a passion for making a real difference in the world. She didn't just want a job, she wanted to use her skills to change the world, to create opportunities for people who were often overlooked because of their race. But no matter how hard she worked or how much she proved herself, there was always one obstacle she couldn't overcome: the prejudice that followed her at every step. She knew she was capable, yet she also knew that many would see her as less because of the color of her skin. That reality had never been far from her mind. Still, she kept pushing, kept striving, because Amara was determined. She believed that hard work would eventually pay off, that her dream of making an impact would one day become a reality. Her dream wasn't just about personal success, it was about uplifting others like her. But that dream was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. Amara sat in the sleek, modern office, her hands resting on the polished wooden table, trying to appear calm, but her heart raced. She had prepared for this moment for months, researching the company, practicing her responses, and anticipating any question they might throw at her. Everything was aligned perfectly. She was the right fit for the role. She had the qualifications, the experience, and the drive to make a real impact. This job was hers. The interview began, and Amara dove into her answers confidently, speaking about her past work, the projects she'd led, and her vision for the future. She could tell the interviewers were impressed. They nodded, exchanged glances, and even asked follow-up questions, eager to know more. She could feel it, the connection, the understanding, the mutual respect. She knew she was doing everything right. She ended her responses with a clear vision of how she could add value to the company, how her experience, mixed with her unique perspective, would help them break new ground. The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. The lead interviewer, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. "We'll be in touch," he said coldly, his tone distant, even dismissive. Amara smiled, standing up to shake his hand, convinced that everything had gone perfectly. But as she stepped out of the office and walked towards the elevator, something didn't sit right. Her gut told her that she had done more than enough to earn the position. She had nailed every answer. Yet the polite smiles and the "we'll be in touch" left a bitter taste in her mouth. The moment she got home, her phone rang. It was the company. She answered quickly, hoping for good news. "Thank you for your time, Amara," the voice on the other end began. "After much consideration, we've decided to move forward with another candidate." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She felt her chest tighten as she tried to process the rejection. But it wasn't just about being rejected, it was the why. The reason they couldn't hire her wasn't that she wasn't qualified. No, it was something more insidious. She could feel it in the way they had looked at her, differently. She knew what was really at play here. The color of her skin had sealed her fate before they even gave her a fair chance. The disappointment was overwhelming, but it was more than that. A deep, simmering anger bubbled up inside her. The kind of anger that made her blood boil, but also sparked something else, something more powerful. She was no longer just hurt. She was determined. Amara sat there, staring out the window, her mind racing. She had worked her entire life for this moment, and now they were telling her she wasn't enough. That her qualifications, her hard work meant nothing because of something she couldn't control? This wasn't just a personal defeat, it was a slap in the face to everything she stood for. But in that moment of deep hurt, a decision formed. She wasn't going to let this define her. No more. She wasn't going to beg for a chance from a company that couldn't see her worth. She would show them. She would take control in a way they never expected. This rejection would be the fire that lit her path to something much bigger. She wasn't just going to prove them wrong. She was going to change the game entirely. Amara couldn't sleep. The rejection, though painful, had ignited something inside her, something more than just anger. She was determined to take action, but not in the way most people would think. Revenge? That wasn't her. What she needed wasn't just to show them they were wrong. No, she was thinking bigger. She wasn't going to beg for a position at their table. She was going to create her own seat. The next morning, Amara sat down at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. She started with the basics, researching the company. She already knew they had a reputation for hiring people who were familiar with their corporate culture, but what did that really mean? Were they truly the best at what they did, or was their success based on something else? She dug deep. For hours, she sifted through reports, articles, and financial statements. She was looking for cracks in their empire. No company, no matter how successful, was perfect. There had to be something she could use, something that would give her the leverage she needed. Her eyes scanned through the company's financials. Profit margins, declining market share, the shift in customer satisfaction. She saw it. The company's leadership was becoming complacent, not evolving with the times. There was a growing disconnect between the company's traditional practices and the demands of the modern world. But what really caught her attention was the leadership team. She saw the names of the same individuals who had been in charge for years. Old money, old ideals. There was no diversity in the decision-making room. All of them were men. All of them were white. That wasn't just a red flag, it was a glaring sign of stagnation. Amara's mind raced. She wasn't just going to take the traditional route of applying to other companies or accepting a mediocre offer. She was going to take a much more daring approach. She wasn't going to change her life. She was going to change their business. She wasn't angry. She was focused. There was no room for emotion in this decision, only strategy. She started mapping out her plan, piece by piece. The first step? Buy into the company. She knew the power of ownership. It wasn't enough to fight from the outside. She needed to get inside and change things from within. But it wouldn't be easy. The cost of buying into the company was high, and it would require finding investors who believed in her vision. She began reaching out to contacts she'd made over the years, former colleagues, successful business people who were passionate about diversity and change. She explained her plan. At first, people were skeptical. It sounded risky, ambitious, almost impossible. But Amara was persuasive. She wasn't just selling them a dream, she was selling them a new future, one where the company would thrive because it was built on principles that everyone could support. As weeks passed, the pieces of the plan started falling into place. She found investors who believed in her, who saw the opportunity in revolutionizing a company that had become complacent. She invested her own savings, stretched every resource she had, and found a way to purchase shares. She wasn't just playing a game, she was changing the rules. And with each step forward, Amara's plan became more than just a vision. It was a living, breathing mission. She wasn't doing this out of revenge. She wasn't doing it for spite. She was doing it to change the system, to bring about the kind of leadership that was inclusive, diverse, and forward-thinking. Her drive and focus grew stronger with every obstacle she overcame. She could feel the weight of her decision, how much was at stake, but she knew this was the only way to create the kind of company that could stand the test of time. This was no longer about one job. This was about an entire industry, an entire system. Amara knew this wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about money. It was about influence, power, and trust. The road ahead was filled with obstacles, but she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to back down now. The first challenge was the cost. Buying into a company like this wasn't just about buying shares. It was about accumulating enough to have a voice at the table. Amara needed to secure millions of dollars to purchase a significant stake. Her savings weren't nearly enough, but she had built a strong network over the years. She began reaching out to investors she had met throughout her career, some she'd worked with in the past, others who had known her for her innovative ideas and forward-thinking approach. At first, the meetings were difficult. People were cautious, skeptical even. They knew her reputation, but many questioned whether a woman, especially one from a background like hers, could truly pull off something so monumental. Her first few proposals were met with rejection. "It's too risky," they said. "The company is already too established." But Amara wasn't discouraged. She knew this wouldn't be easy. She had heard rejection her whole life, but this time every no only made her more determined. She went back to the drawing board, refining her pitch, rethinking her strategy. She wasn't just asking for money, she was presenting an opportunity. She laid out how the company's stagnation was leading to its downfall. How diversity wasn't just a moral imperative, it was a business necessity. And most importantly, how the leadership was out of touch with the changing world. She showed them the financial potential of what they could accomplish if they shifted their focus, if they started building a company that was truly inclusive. One by one, investors began to listen. They saw the vision in her eyes. Slowly, the momentum started to build. It was still far from enough, but Amara had her first investor. It wasn't a large amount, but it was a start. The next few months were filled with constant negotiations, meetings, and financial analysis. She didn't just need to buy shares from the open market. She needed to convince some of the current owners to sell to her. But these were people who had been in power for decades. Old money. People who didn't like change. People who didn't understand why someone like her, someone with no real connections in the corporate world, was suddenly interested in their company. "Why do you want this?" they asked her, over and over. Her answer was always the same: "I want to build something better." But not everyone was willing to sell. Some were reluctant to even consider her as a serious buyer. Amara had to get creative. She began networking at higher levels, reaching out to industry leaders, people who had worked with the company in the past and who now had influence in other areas. She didn't just want to buy shares, she needed allies. People who believed in her vision. One by one, her circle grew. She had one investor who knew someone in the boardroom who could help her buy a significant portion of stock. Another was a former senior executive who had been let go years ago, someone who understood the inner workings of the company and shared her frustration with its outdated policies. Together, they began plotting their moves. They slowly started buying up more shares, all under the radar. It was a delicate game, one wrong move, and everything could fall apart. But with each successful negotiation, with each share she acquired, Amara's confidence grew. She wasn't just accumulating stock. She was accumulating power, a quiet, calculated power that could shift the tides of the company. The tension was building. Amara was getting closer to her goal, but she still needed more shares. The company was large and the stakes were high. Every move had to be carefully calculated. Every dollar she invested needed to bring her one step closer to her ultimate goal. And then came the turning point. The breakthrough she had been waiting for. Amara received a call from a powerful financial institution. One of the investors she had approached had finally convinced a group of key stakeholders to sell a significant portion of their shares. It wasn't a majority yet, but it was enough to give her a real voice in the company. She had just become a serious player. Her team now had enough shares to influence the direction of the company, and Amara was in a position to negotiate for board positions. This was the moment that changed everything. The day had finally arrived. Amara sat in her car, parked outside the company's headquarters, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. It had been a long journey, months of hard work, setbacks, sleepless nights, and endless negotiations. But today, She was going to walk through those doors as the owner of the company, or at least a significant portion of it. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The morning sun was bright, reflecting off the glass walls of the towering building in front of her. It felt surreal, almost like a dream, but she knew this was real. Amara walked through the front doors, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The security guard at the entrance greeted her with a polite smile, not recognizing her as the new force about to change the company's fate. As she moved through the building, the atmosphere felt different today. The usual hustle and bustle, the low hum of corporate life was still there, but something in the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. She made her way to the elevator, her mind racing with everything she'd accomplished to get here. This wasn't just a business deal. This was about her resilience, her strength, and her vision. This was about proving that she could overcome everything that had tried to hold her back, the systemic racism, the prejudice, the doubts, and the barriers. The elevator doors slid open, and as Amara stepped inside, she couldn't help but glance at the reflection of herself in the polished silver walls. She had made it. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was in control. The elevator stopped on the top floor. She stepped out, walking toward the boardroom where the company's leadership met. She could feel the eyes of the employees as she passed them, some curious, some confused, but all unsure of what was happening. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't waver. She had every right to be here, and she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel like she didn't. As she pushed open the door to the boardroom, she was greeted with silence. The members of the leadership team, men who had been in power for decades, were sitting around the table, frozen in shock. They hadn't seen this coming. Amara stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room. There was no doubt in her eyes, no hesitation. She had earned this moment. "I'm Amara, your new boss," she said, her voice steady and clear. The room was still. No one knew what to say. Amara walked toward the head of the table, where the CEO, an older man, well-dressed but visibly uncomfortable, sat. He stood up as she approached, his face turning pale. What is this?" he stammered, his voice betraying his confusion and fear. "I own a significant portion of this company now," Amara replied calmly, her eyes locked on his, "and I'm here to lead it into a new era." The tension in the room was palpable. This was a power shift, one that no one had expected. The men in the room who had controlled the company for years could only stare at her in disbelief. The system they had built, a system that excluded people like Amara, was crumbling before their eyes. "I'm not here to tear down everything you've built," she continued, "but to take it to the next level, a level where diversity, innovation, and inclusivity are at the forefront. We're going to evolve, and I'm going to make sure everyone here gets a seat at the table." Amara's words echoed through the room. She wasn't just asserting her power. She was declaring a new vision, one that included everyone. She wasn't here to settle for the old ways. She was going to create something that would stand as a legacy, a company that wasn't just successful, but just and forward-thinking. As the CEO stumbled to find his words, Amara turned to the team. "I'll be working closely with all of you to build this company into something everyone can be proud of. We're going to lead, not just follow." The boardroom, once filled with quiet whispers of power and privilege, was now filled with the energy of a new era. Amara had just taken the first step toward transforming everything they knew. Her journey, her vision, had come to fruition. And this moment wasn't just a victory over those who had doubted her. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been overlooked or underestimated. It was a win for change. As Amara stood there, looking out over the boardroom table, she knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but now she had the power to shape it. This was more than just about buying a company. It was about changing the system. And Amara was ready to lead. It wasn't easy, but Amara had always known it wouldn't be. The real work began the moment she took control of the company. The first few months were a whirlwind, meeting with her newly appointed leadership team, reviewing policies, and understanding the deep-rooted issues within the company. There was a lot to fix, a lot to change. But Amara wasn't afraid. She had always believed that change wasn't just about making things look better on the surface. It was about fundamental transformation. She started by looking at the company's hiring practices. For years, it had been dominated by people from a narrow, privileged background. Minorities, women, people of color, and marginalized groups were left out of the decision-making rooms. Amara knew that the first step in creating a truly inclusive company was bringing in voices from every corner of society. She knew how it felt to be the only person in the room who didn't look like everyone else. So, she made it her mission to hire people who had faced discrimination, people who had the skills and the ambition but had been denied opportunities simply because of their background. She worked with HR to create a hiring system based on merit and potential, not just who you knew or where you came from. The company's culture began to shift. People who had been overlooked in the past finally had a chance to shine. Amara hired experts from all industries, people who had been silenced and underestimated for far too long. She opened the door for young professionals, women, people of color, and people with disabilities to rise to leadership positions. As Amara walked through the halls of the company, she saw it all happening. Diverse teams brainstorming together, working in unison, bringing fresh ideas that were challenging the old way of doing things. Creativity was flowing in ways the company had never seen before. And it wasn't just about diversity. It was about respect, collaboration, and innovation. The company was thriving. Sales were up. But more importantly, morale was higher. Employees felt like they were a part of something bigger than just a paycheck. They were part of a company that valued them for who they were and what they brought to the table. Amara's commitment to inclusion had created an environment where people felt heard, respected, and empowered. It didn't take long for the company to become known as a leader in social responsibility and innovation. They not only produced cutting-edge products, but they also led by example in creating a fair and just workplace. Amara stood on the balcony of her office one afternoon, looking out over the city skyline. The company had grown, and so had she. What had started as a battle for a job had turned into a movement for change in an industry that had been stuck in the past. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the rejection, the doubts, the setbacks, and the moments of uncertainty. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that she had done it. She had created something that would outlive her. A company built on fairness, equality, and opportunity for all. Amara knew this was just the beginning. The work of true transformation never stopped, but as she looked at the diverse faces in her office, she knew that the world was beginning to change. She had made a difference, not just for herself, but for others. And that was the greatest victory of all.